our last session, which is the skill development logistics in logistics sector. Our panel and speakers will discuss about the present state of trained and skilled manpower in logistics sector in India, role of National Skill Development Corporation (NSDC) in transport and logistics sector, and how training and skill development will help the industry and the training and skill required to keep up with the booming e-commerce industry. May I now request Captain T.S. Ramanujam, CEO, Logistics Sector Skill Council, who is the chair for the session, to start with the session, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Fellow panelists and distinguished guests, firstly, my very sincere thanks to Mr. Shanti Narayan, and all this would not have been possible without his guidance. Let me give you a little brief on these books that we have released. The Indian Railways has been doing this training for many, many decades. But I think for the first time, this is a book which is released under a certain format, which is called the National Skill Qualifications Framework, which is an outcome-based training. That is number one. Number two, this requirement has arisen from someone outside the railways. This started when Tata Steel and Wrights requested us if we can get into training for some of the job roles in for the railways. And of course, we couldn't look anywhere else other than for Mr. Shanti Narayan's help in CILT. And we've been at this for the past almost 4 to 5 months to produce this. That shows the kind of rigor that goes into developing these documents, which will then become a basis for developing the course content so that the candidate on completion of the training becomes absolutely job ready. So that is the little background on these books. I'll finish off with a round of introductions. We have a very, very illustrious panel. Mr. Ahirwar comes from the IRTS, the 1996 batch, and has been, in his career, has won the National Award for improving efficiency in logistics operations. And that's something which is very, very creditable. And now he's bringing in all his experience into the new kid of the block, can we say that so? The division of logistics in the Ministry of Commerce. We've had a lot of interaction with him, and we've been working with them for clearing most of these job roles. Julian, we'll await him. He's having a meeting with the Joint Secretary, I understand. He'll soon be joining us. But if you look at Julian's profile, it almost is a saga of how container lines have grown over the many decades from 1971. He has been a part of every merger and acquisition and grown with each merger and acquisition. And finally, he's now the South Asia head for the AP Moller-Maersk, and also is part of our governing council. Mr. Raghuram, sitting beside me, is the physical embodiment of the document that we released in the morning, Logistics 4.0. He brings all that technology can do for logistics. And of course, like all of his ilk, he brings that pedigree of IT and IIM and so on and so forth, which has resulted in so many of these startups in this country. Mr. Tamil Rajan is actually the heart for e-commerce. I was just speaking with him this afternoon, and like any other e-commerce, you live out of the suitcase, moving here places, consulting, trying to improve efficiencies across in multiple e-commerce companies. So, I mean, it was a very fortuitous meeting today because we were looking for content for this e-commerce, and honestly, I couldn't find anything. We did a whole lot of net search, nothing. But I think I have found in Mr. Tamil Rajan somebody who can develop all the content that we need to do for our future courses. Thank you in advance, sir. So, with that round of introductions, I think we'll move on with the conduct of this particular session. I have a little presentation to make, and whether you like it or not, you would need to bear with me, because this is something which has got to be known to people from the industry about what this Sector Skill Council is all about. We've been at it for the past 2 years, and so I'd like to kind of run you through a small presentation which would take me about 7 to 10 minutes. So, Mr. Julian, I just introduced you. I mean that your career kind of reflects the growth of the container lines across the world, many mergers, many acquisitions, and continuous growth. And that's how Mr. Julian now is there with us on a second stint in this country. And of course, he also brings with him a pedigree of education from the Oxford. I'll think while my presentation gets loaded, sir, I think your presentations are ready. Would you like to start, please?
Mr. Ramanujam, Mr. Bevis, Mr. Rajan, Mr. Raghuram, octogenarian amongst us, Mrs. Shanti Narayan, Madam Achari. Good afternoon to you all, and good afternoon to all logisticians in the audience. I mean, though there are not many today, after lots of session on the hardwares of logistics. Now we would be focusing on a bit of human ways, to an extent, large extent, software of the logistics industry. Dear friends, we have seen emergence of logistics in India, and a kind of a landmark decision which is being taken by the Government of India, that is declaring or according logistics infrastructure status, and also constituting division under logistics as logistics division under Department of Commerce in Ministry of Commerce and Industry. This gives a definition to a sector which was otherwise a bundle of activities, and each island in the bundle almost was a very conspicuous a kind of, in a way, a standalone elements. Logistics sector has, as we have seen, majority of it is infrastructure, and the outcome of which is determined by the so-called minority in the sense of the volume as a human factor, and we would focus on human factor, for which the skill development is a sine qua non. Today, of course, we are largely going to be talking about the skills in general in the workforce, but I would be having greater focus on enabling the able workforce, I mean, which I do not see as unskilled as such. We might be having different skills, but we may not having the right kind of skills should not be called as unskilled. So let's look at the better half or the fairer half of the workforce in the logistics sector. I would contain my presentation on following areas, like we'll have some snapshots of the existing scenario, then the logistics as nature of work, the SWOT analysis, and the interventions which we can have at various levels. And of course, I'll try to put up a business case for participation of women in logistics. Now this is just a picture which shows India amongst the top countries which have facing a skill shortage, and to the extent that 64% of the industries in India are having a shortage of skills. Now, there's another picture which shows the vacancy due to skill shortfall, and also a picture juxtaposed to that, the unemployment in a lot of millions. India has almost 36% of the shortage of skill attributable to, a shortage of manpower attributable to skill shortage. And against this, we have, though, about more than 7.17 or about 18 million unemployed people, and this number is growing, which is at an alarming rate, which probably shows that if they are unemployed, they are employable as well. They are having the requisite education, maybe some skills also, but maybe not the right kind or suitable kind of skills. Now, if we see from the perspective of the women representation in logistics sector or in the industry in general, we see there's no woman among the top 20 highest paid CEOs, and the highest earning male CEO is drawing about 83 crore a year, and the woman counterpart draws about 19.8 or 18 crores. And we know that women probably are not great negotiator when it comes to negotiating the packages. They prefer working at spaces closer to the homes. They have issues staying late hours in office. They also face a bias against them when it comes to, employing them. And of course, they get less increment and lesser compensation. Now, if we look at or try to think about what can be the possible causes of this poorer representation or participation of women in logistics sector in particular, or in general in any other industry, we see it's basically two factors. One is the pay, and another is the working conditions. Now we see the adversity, which is definitely against, not in favor of the women. The gender gap in hourly wages, as we have seen, we are in the league of the least developed countries like Benin, West African countries. Of course, we also find the company of Japan and South Korea, which are developed countries as well. But probably their situation we are not aware. But in our case, largely the socio-economic factors which determines, or the belief system or the mindset which determines the wage gaps. We'll be talking about this at later stages. Now you see this year-wise salary analysis of men and women. You see that over the years, the gap, which was as wide as 44% in 2007, it has bridged further, and the gap has narrowed to minus 25%, not in favor of women. So it is another fact that the variation is also, determined by the sector in which the women are working. And logistics sector being a kind of a male-dominant sector, which women do not find very comfortable to work in, there are less representation and less wages as well. The variation is more pronounced in the private sector compared to the public sector, because public sector, of course, we do not have that wage variation, which is not permissible also. But yes, in outsourced services, there may be some kind of wage variation. There's another aspect of the wage gap. Now we see the age-wise variation. We find that in the most productive age, or means the early age, 18 to 30 years, the wage gap is quite wide, and it is widest in the range of like 30 to 50 years. But when it reaches the maturity, the wage gap is quite less. Now, socioeconomic factor probably also determine the wage gap. Like we see in the states like Uttarakhand and Punjab, the wage gap is very narrow, while in case of Bihar, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, the wage gap is quite wide. Probably the socioeconomic factor plays a role here too, besides the geography. Now, the other aspect of the logistics as a nature of work is, so as to understand the working conditions, we can classify these the logistics works into three basic categories. One is the mobility intensive, which are definitely not very conducive for women to work in. There's a low rate of training in the sector. There's, of course, the problems like harassment, incompatibility of work and a family life, and lack of on-road assistance, kind of. And another category, as you can say, there's a masculine kind of work where more of the manual job is involved. You can consider it as a blue-collar job, which is less preferred by women, and employees also have a preference for male in such jobs. The uncertain working conditions, strenuous nature of work, and of course, much less opportunities for training in the sector. Now, this is the segment which you can say the more of a celebration than the physical work involved. So this can be called as a white-collar job. It is a fixed workspace, a desk job, and women prefer it over the other two categories of work. Employers do have a bias for, a bias against employing women in the sector, but if they do not have that, probably they can benefit from parity. There's not much of the individual growth in this segment, and the talent, the value-added talent or the services are not given much importance. I've attempted a SWOT analysis of women when it comes to their participation in the logistics sector in particular, or otherwise also in any other industry in general. Now we have more strengths and more opportunities, especially in the wake of technological development, which definitely is in favor of employing more women in the logistics sector. And the technological development throws up a huge opportunity for women, wherein they are able to overcome the need for the physical, work, which they find as an adversity for themselves. There's also realization among the employers that gender equity promotes efficiency and also the creativity in the organization. So having some learning from here, we think about the interventions which can be undertaken by the government or the industry or the non-government organizations like CILT or any such institutional arrangements. So we understand like what government can do, some policy measures to promote participation of women in the logistics sector, and also giving or promoting skill development generally and especially among women. And there can be enough endeavor made by the government or through a policy instrument to ensure the minimum wage gap, especially in the private sector between men and women. Yeah, but there is a great need of providing conveniences along the road when it comes to providing infrastructure, which government can definitely think about, And in fact, it is already being done in case of the projects which are being overseen by NHAI. They are providing such restrooms or kind of amenities which are required for women. There can be financial or non-financial incentives to the employers for promoting women employment in the sector. Some of the intervention which industry can adopt, there were we have seen that there are so many adversities, and besides adversities, there are strengths also of women employment. So if industry can think about customizing the driving leads, means women, if they are the drivers or they are into the transportation industry, they can be given such leads, maybe a short distance, or maybe such leads where they go in the morning and have a return journey, also return working also, and come back by evening back home. They can be given the vehicles which are more conducive for them, or maybe they are put on such routes where the facilities or the basic infrastructure is available. There can be flexi time of working for women. And one more innovation, if this can be examined by, of course, Logistic Council as well. Can there be scope for giving couple the employment? Both can have a same set of skills or maybe different set of complementary skills, and the couple is employed for the job. This will ensure continuous availability of the manpower to the organization. It will also put in variety. It may be available at relatively lesser cost, because it is not, of course, get one, buy one get one free, but it would be somewhere near that. Buy one get half free, or better half free. So kind of combination of duties and combination of complementary skills can be thought about. It's just an idea, and can be explored further. Maybe if it needs some study, can be conducted. Industry can also be part of the success initiative of improving on-road assistance, and promote work-life balance. Being a little more sensitive about the women, and giving adequate medical insurance, and of course adoption of greater technology. Of course, technology is also leading to an extent to substitution of manpower. This again, the NGOs like CILT or WILAT for that matter can take up the cause and build awareness about the courses, and also help improving the adaptability or the endurance level of the women workforce. And undertake research, of course, because what we lack today in India, especially about the logistics sector, is the information. No study, not much of the research or comprehensive research. There are though piecemeal researches here and there, and we do tend to take some decision based on such piecemeal research, which are, I can say, not comprehensive. Because it's definitely a challenge to conduct a comprehensive research in logistics sector, which is very, very diverse sector. Just an appeal, a kind of a business case we have tried to make. If we do not ignore the other half of the workforce and involve in the economic activity the other half as well, it would definitely ensure a great availability of manpower, and would promote competition, would promote efficiency. And of course, the women, as many of the studies have found, have greater multitasking abilities compared to men. I think that can be banked upon. And it is also inferred from some of the researchers that coexistence of men and women is conducive for promoting creativity in the organization. So the solution finding would be a more effective exercise. We also see that women who are coming to the industry or in the workplace, they are relatively having higher education levels and definitely a greater motivation to prove themselves. Women also definitely represent half of the consumers of the services in the country. Therefore, the valuable feedback can help in improving the services and developing newer services. This is all I have to say for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ahirwar. Just to kind of add on to what you're saying, said in the council, in fact, for the first time in the country, we trained forklift operators, and they were introduced to the Honorable President, I mean the previous President, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. And in fact, out of 17 women, 11 qualified, and out of that 11, one graduated on to operate reach trucks. Reach trucks because it's a little more of judgment, you know, you can't see the cargo, it's a load as such. So that's as far as that goes. So well put, sir. That's a social issue. I mean, we are on the stage debating something which is related with their employment in the logistics sector. Thank you. We have also incidentally started a training program. You said about private enterprise. IKEA has funded this along with UNDP and the NSDC. We are now targeting focused where women could be employed across in the logistics sector. There's an interesting kind of a thing that is happening in Bangalore, e-vehicles. Women are being given that, and then over a period of time, they get into an ownership of these vehicles. In all this, one little point that I would like to suggest is all this will work provided there are credible, solid women self-help groups. That must be integral to this. Otherwise, leaving them to work on their own is not really a solution. You talked about this buy one, get one free. That's actually happens. Ashok Leyland, couple, lady, heavy vehicle drivers, fell in love while learning driving heavy vehicles, got married. I don't know whether they're driving a vehicle together or not, but definitely that also happened. So I will move on with my presentation about the Logistics Skill Council. This presentation as to why we need a Sector Skill Council and how it's constituted, who are the governing council members, the scope and the role, how it functions, what this qualification pack development process is all about, and a little bit about what we have done thus far. As I said earlier, this is a first shift in the format from the National Council of Vocational Training to the NSQF. What does it mean? It means earlier you trained say for example a welder. You really did not know whether he would be able to do a 3G MIG welding or not, but yes, you trained him generally on welding. Now you will specifically train him for a particular job role. So there's a clear definition of the job role, and this is done by doing an occupational map and a functional analysis, which I'll explain as we go on in this presentation, basis which a training need analysis is done, which is in terms of attitude, skills and knowledge, which is then well documented, and the whole thing comes out in a kind of what is called a qualification pack, basis which the curriculum and the content and all that is made. This SSC is a not-for-profit society, and falls under the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. The Logistics Skill Council has Mr. Dinesh as the chairman. He is CMD of the TVS Logistics Services Limited. And also we have Dr. Trivedi, who was earlier Secretary Shipping, as the advisor. Incidentally, here we have two illustrious luminaries who are also part of our governing council, Dr. Shantinarayan himself and Mr. Julian Bevis. Our Sector Skill Council represents the 12 subsectors that we cover, as shown on this slide. So this gives you firstly a kind of a scope of what logistics is all about. Earlier, logistics was just about warehousing or transportation. But then now we have kind of scoped it out. Warehousing includes storage and packaging, tertiary packaging for transportation, land transportation, including heavy vehicle driving. Incidentally, on this subject, we've got an inquiry from the Gulf for setting up driver training institutes, 10 of them pan-India for right-hand drive. So this is a request which has come in. We've just kind of submitted our expression of interest. Hopefully it will come through. We also got an expression of interest from Oman for developing a job role for their container terminal. It didn't come through. But the very fact that in 2 years of our existence, a country abroad made an inquiry itself is a testimony as to the work we have done. We also create the job roles for the courier and express industry, the port terminals, ICDs and the container freight stations, air cargo operations, the freight forwarding, EXIM and the customs, cold chain logistics solutions, e-commerce, inland waterways and marine services. For the first time, incidentally, for the inland waterways, we have created the job roles. It was never there for 70 years. For the first time, we kind of scoped this entire thing out. Supply chain has to do in in-plant logistics. The other day, I was talking with the AICT chairman erstwhile, and he said that manufacturing is the main thing which drives jobs. I said, sir, 70% of a manufacturing company has contract workers, and out of that, 60% are in logistic job roles. Assembly lines are getting automated. Line feeders are logisticians. So that's the way it is, liquid logistics. And of course now, these books that we have released are testimonials to the fact that we'll be starting off on rail logistics. The Sector Skill Council, as I said, does the occupational map and the functional analysis in a particular sector. So this is a detailed study. We go to the particular industry, kind of flesh it out as to what are the departments, what are the various job roles, at what levels, and work out what job roles are in demand and what is the function that each job role does. Basis which this qualification packs and the occupational standards are created, then the curriculum, and then thereafter we affiliate the training partners and assessment bodies. CILT, incidentally, is a training partner who would now be taking on all the training for the private rail operators. And also, we do the assessment and certification. All the certification comes with the Government of India's logo. There is also a great expression of interest from other countries to kind of tie up. Just today morning, we had an expression of interest from the Japanese Institute of Logistics to kind of partner with us. So slowly over a period of time, I suppose there is a recognition of this sector and the Sector Skill Council. We also help in the mobilization, training and the placement of various the candidates. And also in terms of the placement, we kind of ensure that the training, what is kind of bespoke model is created so that they are absolutely job ready. Mr. Ahirwar mentioned about we have been operating in silos. This shows how, multiple ministries with whom we interact with, Ministry of Shipping, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, state governments, and now all this has now been come together, and now we are working with the Division of Logistics in the Ministry of Commerce. We also get the fundings through the Ministry of Rural Development under what is called the DDU GKY program and the Ministry of Skill Development, through which we do the training and then give it to give the trained candidates to the companies. Now this is the kind of a rigor that goes into development of the qualification packs. An occupational mapping carried out, then the outcome of which is we carry out what are the activities, knowledge, skills required, basis which the functional analysis is done. From there, we develop the qualification packs which will tell exactly what is the outcome in terms of attitude, skills, knowledge, which will give you the competencies, which will then give you the performance criteria, assessment criteria, and then the whole thing gets promulgated together as a qualification pack. And then it goes to the National Skill Development Agency. It is validated by the line ministries, and then it is uploaded in the National Qualification Register. Once it's uploaded in the National Qualification Register, these programs become eligible for government funding or state funding. So this is an occupational map, for example, for a port terminal, ICD and container freight stations. As you'll see, the columns all show the various departments. Port operations, documentation, mooring, stevedoring, crane, material handling equipment, operation, engineering, maintenance, and surveying. And then that also shows on the y-axis the various levels. And then the various job roles which are in demand. We cover only 80% of the job roles which are in demand, and typically up to the managerial cadre. Now this shows how an occupational map can then be developed to give a candidate lateral mobility and upward progression, which in this sector thus far has been lacking. If I worked in a warehouse in Pune, and if my family shifted to Bombay, could I work in a container freight station? The answer so far was no. We have given a pathway. Now, the most interesting thing, if you let's take one particular example of this warehouse associate in packing. The minimum qualification is 10th class. Now after he qualifies and then grows up and becomes, for example, a goods machine, packaging machine operator, and then a material handling equipment operator come technician, he can move on to a courier executive, documentation and claim processing, which has an entry level of 12th class pass. So in the process of his career development, his educational qualification, though he is only from 10th class, he is now carrying out a job which is where the basic qualification is a 12th pass. And the same will be the case where in a diploma candidate will move up and possibly will do the job which a degree holder will be doing. This is a map of a functional analysis which shows how and with whom the candidate would need to work with on what kind of topics, so that the candidate, when he goes to the company, is absolutely job ready. He knows with whom he will be interacting on what. Now this is a slide which in fact Mr. Keith Newton, the Secretary General CILT, also commended. In fact, we did not have access to that information, but we had parallelly developed this kind of a pathway. That is, an associate looks after the physical supply chain, the executive looks after the information flow, the supervisor, the daily management system, and the manager is the head of the profit center. Now to cater for this, we have developed the entire occupational standards under 3 categories. The compulsory category is physical delivery in a classroom kind of a format. The electives and the optionals will be an online kind of a delivery. And I request among this illustrious professionals who are here, we would be grateful if you could come forward and help us in development of this kind of occupational standards. There is a tremendous shortage of expertise in this sector. The contact, you can access the contact number from the Sector Skill Council, or you could offline meet, but we really need your help. This is a kind of a rationalized qualification packs which are promulgated. Why I say rationalized? Earlier when the European Union advised us, they said you should go into detail. So we had created, for example, in a warehouse, a picker, packer, binning, kitting, labeling, like that. But in Indian conditions, multitasking is the norm, not the exception. Therefore, we had to rationalize these entire job roles, which we have now done. And this is now pending line ministry validation. We need to get all the ministries together, and then finally these rationalized job roles will be uploaded as what is called the qualification file and the National Qualification Register. Now what have we done thus far? In fact, we have trained about 1 lakh plus this year. The last column shows that. And we have placed about 68,000, which results in a placement percentage of about 54%. That is 53%. That is certified to placed. We want to scale it up to 80-90%. So we need the help of good, credible training institutions from the industry to come forward and help us in this. We have felt always that training without a job is meaningless. So we emphasize on this. In fact, we go out of the way to help where there's a demand, try to match it with the kind of trained candidates. We've taken a lead in creating apprenticeship under the National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme as the main pathway for the logistics sector. Incidentally, these operate the curriculum that has been developed for the rail side also is through the apprenticeship route. Going forward, we have launched for the first time in the country, and this is my last slide, and I would especially request you to kind of take note of this particular slide, because this is where you all could help us in coming forward to teach in various colleges. This is a first of a kind degree apprenticeship in logistics, and we got excellent response from both universities as well as the industry. How it is done is 6 semesters form a graduate program. The odd semesters 1, 3 and 5 will be in the academic institution. The even semesters 2, 4 and 6 will be apprenticeship in an industry. So what the candidate gets at the end of 3 years is a degree in logistics. It could be a BBA, BBM as desired by the university. They will get an apprenticeship trade certificate, and they will also do 3 minimum LSC certificate programs. So all this, and financially, the candidate gets a stipend which majorly offsets the kind of training fee that he would need to pay to the college. This has been welcomed by the MHRD, and this will be launched June 19 for the first time in the country. Thank you. May I now request, I think there are 2 presentations in the line and this is a little too heavy. Mr. Rajan, would you like to take on? And
good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, CILT, for giving this opportunity. Thank you, Captain, for the introduction. So how many of you have placed order online, bought something so far? That's all? Yeah, 70%? Okay. The average age of an e-commerce shopper today is less than 30 in India. So we have the youngest shoppers. That indicates how potential this could grow. That is number 1. 2, as we open the newspapers during the festive season, first 6 pages are filled with advertisements, offers, freebies, all of that. Then you get to see your news only on the 7th or 8th page onwards. That's a trend that we have been seeing, especially the last 2 years, as the fund comes in, etc. And the e-commerce companies are throwing freebies, very attractive, low prices, all of this. Is there a magic, or who is paying for it? I'm sure this is the money somebody has to be recovered from somewhere, right? At one end it could look scary or anything like that. No, there are no magics here. This particular industry is grown like that exactly. You have to get the shoppers to shift from one position to another. So there is a lot of freebies which goes, etc. So the first a few thousand or a few lakh who get the benefit, later when the whole mass becomes in crores, the price gets adjusted. That's how it is. And India has been magical, and we have grown very, very steady, and currently also it is over 31% stable growth. Interesting part is earlier, whenever there is an ad which goes, the graph hits up, the sale will go up, and then the ads are not there, then it will hit. Now it has come to the point, even if you do not release ad at all, no campaigns whatsoever, still the business grows. That indicates a healthy growth of this particular business, and it's going to transform. So this is a short introduction about how the e-commerce industry, the business has been growing in this particular country, and it has been very, very attractive. That's the only reason where you have a lot of foreign investment coming into this particular place and big giants fighting in this particular space. And the start of it, if you look at maybe 8-9 years back, when the early stages of e-commerce growth, etc., the first when they came, they needed stronger logistics one. And if I really agree with Mr. Day in the earlier session, he was actually throwing up that particular point that Amazon is a logistics core company. So when they came in first, India had a handful of logistic companies here, but they could not cope up to the expectation level of e-commerce, because somebody clicks order before he changes his mind, it's better to deliver it. But the conventional courier companies had their own timeline. They said 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. There was some kind of a pattern, so it was not conducive. This compelled these people, let me go on set up on my own. That's how Flipkart started, e-cart, and everybody there. You had all these companies who are e-commerce special delivery companies who came up in no time. And today you have the big funding companies like Carlyle, big ones who are funding into the last mile delivery, all of this particular operation. Collectively, this has created a huge amount of jobs, and still, I would say the areas where there is rapid growth is, one is your last mile delivery. You would find as you go on any street, you will find at least 3 or 4 guys with big bags on their back, right, riding. Another is pickers, packers, who are there in the warehouse, because as soon as you click the order, there is someone who is going to run and pick up from the warehouse the respective point, and then it is going to be packed, etc. In my experience, I have seen one particular company where per day order was 1,500. In a span of 9 months, it went up to 40,000 per day. That's a scale of growth it was hitting. And that means we were increasing the number of pickers and packers, and how do you stack it, what are the most ordered items are there in the front and the least ordered are in the back, so that the walking distance of the picker. If you see the whole of data analytics, the method by which the warehouses are built and the orders are processed, they look at, if you have 40,000 orders, how many orders are packed within 60 minutes in-house. Then it has to be transported. How do you work out your transport, logistics, courier, all of that. So, and warehouse skill is another point which has been in-house developed, exactly like how last mile deliveries where the e-commerce companies went on their own. By then others also followed. More companies came, FedEx started delivering, even Blue Dart, everyone has been used, etc. for a delivery. And currently as we speak, a day collectively about 1.5 million a day, which gets delivered on a non-business, non-peak day, non-festival day. And I mean, you can just imagine the kind of a volume, and these are all the organized, the big ones. There are also a lot of small player, entrant level people who are still making up separately. The customer care team, the size of customer, you would be really amazed after the BPOs, the back office operations, etc., which have consumed a lot of people on the customer care, and the BFSI, banking, insurance sector. This you can say the third largest sector who is actually having large back office operations to support the customer, handling the query, the damages, refunds, and whatever which requires to be done, comparing to the other industry. So the amount of jobs that this industry has created is enormous. And if we go along and see what is going to be the future, where this is heading towards, the pick and pack jobs are slowly getting automated. So now the robotics are going to come in place, etc. The newer warehouses are being built in this kind of facility, and lot more data analytics done, etc. So you will find the robots slowly replacing that. And the sorters are already in place. Once the packing is done, the sorting machines are already in place amongst most leading companies today. The sorting which was earlier done manually, so that is moving on. So is it going to reduce the manpower? No, not really. If you really see people who are going to operate this, number one. Two, people are going to develop the IT skill in the robotic automation space, software development. The amount of people who are consumed is very, very large. And we had lots and lots of companies in India alone who have been creating ancillary products, mapping solutions, plenty of ancillary products on which the business still rides on. There are a lot more opportunities in the IT development cycle. There are specific tools which can be created, and that is going to take. So you can say in the next 5 years, still the size of this industry could be, I mean, from 30 billion going towards 200 billion. You can just imagine what's the number it could hit. So these are the important points. So in terms of skill development, what can be developed could be less of menial job, more of skill job. That is how it is going to be, because the menials will be taken over by automation. And these companies are aggressively working on it. They do not want to increase on the manpower. Instead, they will put onto the robots, and robots will do the physical part. Still, you will require a lot more operators than what is the number of people who are doing picking and packing. And a lot more device operation which is going to come. lot more small mobile devices controlled activities which will happen, because currently pick and pack, some are using tabs, some are using variable devices, etc. So some more things will change on that as well. Lot more research which are happening on this. So these all the interesting changes happening in the e-commerce space, and if India is able to develop more skills, looking at what all the areas are going to grow bigger, it's going to open up a big opportunity for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rajan. That throws up two questions in my mind. One, do you think it could lead to more job givers than job takers in terms of more entrepreneurs joining this sector?
Yeah, that is already happening. One, you will find a lot of sellers who are coming into this particular space, because the entire SME sector, there's a lot of sellers who are getting, and yeah, this is one point which I just missed to cover, I can touch upon. Globally, when Amazon set up the center, it was more, they acquired huge million square feet warehouses in America, set up centers, they were acquiring in bulk and then they were selling. But things moved very, very differently. In fact, the Indian model is being looked at very interestingly, and they are trying to take it back to America, which is the seller-based model. So instead of creating a huge purchase model, they never had such large warehouses. In fact, after the next growth which was happening, even for Flipkart, every company, instead of putting bigger warehouses in Gurgaon, probably they were moving to Jaipur. They were setting up multiple warehouses closer to the consumer point. And also the seller purchases, that was very, very interesting. For instance, if there is a customer, earlier model, hub and spoke model, if you place an order from Gurgaon, and consumer is also in Gurgaon, earlier how it was happening is it will go to a central warehousing point, from there the packing will happen, it will go back. Now, it gets packed right there. Your seller has Amazon label, packaging, everything. He literally does everything, and it goes right from there to the closer to the customer. This is a very, very big change. And that's a bigger change in the logistics distribution pattern. This has emerged in the last 4 or 5 years. So that is going to make a big difference. So it will encourage to start more and more sellers. You want to develop an innovative product, unique product. Earlier it was a big challenge to market it, to reach. Now it is not like that. You just create a product, put it on Amazon page, it is seen by millions right immediately. So it has given platform to at least about 1,500,000, 1,40,000 newer products came into both of these companies in the last 3-4 years, which never existed before. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, as Raghuram, Talluri, thanks a lot for having me over. I'd like to share some views carrying off from where Mr. Rajan left in terms of e-commerce, logistics. I also want to put a flavor of how we see skill building in e-commerce and generally logistics change and the role of technology in that. So before that, just a quick introduction. I run this company called LoadShare Networks. We are a logistics technology platform. How we work is we work with SMEs in the logistics space all across India. We provide them complementary strengths to what they have. So they have a local reach, they have a very low cost structure, they know how to navigate the local setup. What we provide is we provide them the technology advantage. We give them a network which connects one to the other. We provide them a SOP and a know-how of how to work in the new economy logistics space. Example is if you have to send a shipment from, let's say, Guwahati to Itanagar, we will have partner number 1 that will do the pickup, the first mile. Partner number 2 does the mid mile, and partner number 3 does the last mile. These are all 3 independent guys. Our technology stitches them together and we operate this network. So this is the model that we are doing. We've been at it for the past 2 years. Where we are now is we have 100 SME partners pan-India, and there's a map. You'll see a lot of concentration in the east and northeast, which is where we started because we felt it's logistically underserved. And some of the, why I'm telling you this is more context for the skill building challenges that we faced and how we kind of overcame them. We have 2,000 delivery boys who work on our app. We serve 3,500 pin codes, which are more in tier 2, tier 3. So we're headquartered in Bangalore, but we don't do much in Bangalore. A lot of our operations are in the, all parts of Northeast we cover, all parts of East we focused on. And our current scale is we do around 40,000 e-commerce shipments per day, right? So, and this includes collecting cash and all. So the context for this is not to advertise LoadShare, but to tell you about what is it that we've seen in terms of complexity of skill building. And this is all, it's simple stuff, but it requires skill, it requires a way of working that is very different from what used to be earlier, right? And we've had to do a lot of things innovatively. Just, stating the obvious, I think why training is critical in the logistics space and I think the whole e-commerce and new age logistics is dependent on customer experience. And if logistics is not right, and if the frontline logistics person who's the only touch point for the customer with that brand, with a Flipkart or an Amazon, that guy is the touch point. And if that guy is not trained, it's a poor customer experience, right? There is cost side. If you have high attrition from the staff because they're not engaged, that's another big cost driver. And equally importantly, we find that these frontline guys are the ones who are able to generate a lot of customer insights that can be fed back to the company, right? So, and all of this requires skill building, and if that's not in place, this thing doesn't take up and doesn't scale up, right? Just some, changing paradigms that we've seen in the whole logistics training side is earlier, if you look at the front line, and this is somewhat beyond logistics as well, there's frontline workers, and there are some workers who are desk workers. The desk workers now have moved on to email. There are a lot of the frontline workers who are working every day in the field. Most of the logistics guys that follow as a part of that are actually, they don't have email. They don't check email as often as we do if you're sitting in offices. So that's a big first point. And the new context now is India has 300 million, just to put numbers to it, there are 300 million deskless workers. There are 400 million internet users, and 300 million of them are actually on Android. So now the field force is actually, capable of operating and navigating the smartphone. And compared to before, they are much better at navigating the smartphone and using the internet from the smartphone because they've not seen the desktop or PC, right? They've kind of leapfrogged, and that's a new generation this new generation frontline workforce that we're dealing with, right? So that's a big change in context, right? So therefore, if earlier you could send some training material and expect people to go through it, that's now completely changed. That doesn't exist anymore. Training earlier used to be the realm of the HR and the training teams. In operations, and at least in the new age logistics operations that we are seeing, it is actually driven by operations teams because they have the most context of what is required on the field, right? And it's a core job of operations. It's not just about saying, okay, you give me a person, I'll operate. You have to actually train that guy. So it's not an HR's responsibility to train somebody who's in Guwahati, right? Or in Tezpur or Itanagar or any of these places. So that's a big shift again that we see, and the operations team take on the role of training. Third, kind of related to this is, training was earlier classroom based. You'll have somebody will come, they'll show some presentation, they say these are the things, this is the SOP that we follow, etc. Now that is with the advent of internet and mobile, the new kind of paradigm of training that we see is mobile led, it is gamified, and it is on the field, right? So there are no classroom trainings of any effect that actually are going to work in this kind of a distributed operation setup, right? And there are, some of these things that we talk about, gamified, etc. I'll speak a little bit more about it. But training is also not dry as it used to be earlier. It has to be engaging. It has to be more like a game. Okay, you play this, you get to the skill level, you go to the next level, and there have to be ways in which we kind of encourage users, the recipients of the training, the frontline force, to actually go through it and get them involved into the whole training thing, rather than say, okay, day 1 you do this, day 2 you do this, day 3 you do this, right? So that's changed completely. Linked to that, there used to be, occasional big structured trainings, and I would say nobody knows where that training led to, right? What is the impact of that training? What is the before after in the life of that particular logistics workforce, or any workforce for that matter, right? How did training change his life? And how did that result in some business outcome that training was supposed to deliver? I think that framing itself was not strong enough. Now the paradigm is like this training, any training of any sort, there has to be an ROI on that. So, and it's not just a one-time training, it's a on-the-job training, retraining, and there's evaluation, right? So you have to find a way by which you train a person, and then you figure out what is the on what dimension has the needle moved, and what is that going to result in for the business. So some of these correlations are becoming much more stronger and much more important to establish, and people are kind of tracking that much better. And with new technology, this is actually getting enabled. Training content used to be designed centrally. In our context, for example, now I have a team that is in Arunachal Pradesh, there's a team in Kerala, there's a team in UP, there's people in Orissa. It's impossible for us to make central content, right? It just doesn't work because, and especially in the logistics space, I have never seen, I used to work with the e-commerce company earlier before I started this. We used to have training in English, and I had to tell them that, look, who knows how to read English in all of these places? That's not their vernacular, that's not their native language, right? So you have to design training content that is designed for who's consuming it, not for the guy who's making it and for what is convenient for the guy who's making it, right? So that's again a big paradigm shift in distributed operations, especially in a country like India. We have to be very, very sensitive that you might make the best training content, but if your content is not consumable by the person on the other side, it's of no use, right? So I think that's a need for a local flavor, need for being vernacular and much more appealing to them is something important. Training used to be seen as additional work. I used to remember when I was working, like, oh, training mein jana hai, right? Who wants to go for a training, right? It's almost like it's being forced on you, and you therefore resist it. And now you have to make it very interesting. And like I spoke about gamification of training, there's another interesting phenomenon that we are seeing, and we are marrying that in our training, which is social-led, right? We know Facebook, Instagram, these are all very powerful channels, right? And these are all social channels. So you have to find a way to marry training into your social and give that a flavor of some of these in vogue social things, right? So examples of this are how do you have, when people are going for training, you have ways by which they can actually say, look, I actually crossed this level and I'm sharing this with a larger set of my, it could be workforce colleagues, it could be people beyond, saying, look, I am now this grade training. Here is my picture receiving this particular certification. Here is my, I've got this many points because I've done this. And how do you share it, and how do you create that engagement within your whole, set of people, and how you as people who are trying to train the people create that excitement that the guy should want to come and get trained, because that gives him some kind of a social premium, right, compared to where he was earlier. So that's again another, we change it from a push, okay, you get pushed into a training classroom, to saying I want to get trained because that gives me something that I can show off, right? So this is a very interesting social phenomenon that we are seeing, and we have to leverage it as much as possible. Again, I spoke a little bit about it in the form of central versus regional, but there's a different nuance to it, which is mass training, one training content for everybody, versus how do you personalize training, right? And you have to make sure that everybody doesn't learn at the same pace. So, and this is now, we're talking about adult training, right? We're not talking about kids who take them through the same standard curriculum, everybody will pick up and they have to pick up and there'll be exams. This is adult training, this is to be different, everybody learns in a very different manner. How do you understand that, and how do you kind of change, how does whatever systems that you're building adjust the rate of training against the person and his ability to consume it. And one more related point to it is it's not a good idea, I believe, that, and is neither feasible for you to train everybody. You have to identify certain pivotal roles that actually need to be trained, because they then, in some form or shape, will actually influence the guys in at the next level. And I think back in the day, I used to work with SSC. I remember I'd done some work on the Construction Skill Council. And in that, we identified that there is a level called as a foreman, right, who's the supervisor. You have different words for it. It's called a team leader in e-commerce logistics. And these guys are the ones, if you train them, then you can pretty much say that there's a good chance that the team below them, the 10, 15, 20 people that they manage, they will get trained. So that's a pivotal role. So instead of trying to train, 20, if you have 20 locations and you have 20 into 20, 400 people, that's a little difficult, more difficult to manage. You don't know how many of them are engaged. But if you focus your attention on those 20 pivotal guys and you train them right, you get a much higher impact, right? And that's also a set that is more easier to train, more easier for you to evaluate the effect of that. And you can be pretty sure that if you train and incentivize these guys well, they can actually train the rest of the guys very well, right? So I think that's a few of the, it's not a comprehensive list, but as I was reflecting on what is changing in training and what is changing in training in the context of logistics, this is what we've seen, as a big changes. So we spoke about, there's another thing that they're also very time pressed, right? You can't say you take out 4 days from your job and get trained. There are you have to make very bite-sized capsule content that can be consumed, and rather than just pull them out from the regular job for 4 days to get trained, right? So these are a few things. The net impact of what we are seeing as how do we see technology in terms of solving for these unique requirements. 1, mobile is the way to go. 2, structured training, which has to be small capsules, small bites that can be used for quick consumption. And 3, you have to have a platform that kind of engages these guys and is a platform for you to know that this is the way they are getting trained, and this is the feedback of, you get some feedback, you get something back from them. Right now, many times we've seen you train, but you never know what's coming back. And if you take the old era of email, you've sent an email, you don't know whether it's been read, it's been consumed. There's no way in which you can say, okay, you can't take a poll of how many people have read it, how many people have understood. None of those things exist. But there are platforms that we now need to build that can actually solve for these. What we've done, I'll give you some snippets. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. What we have is a platform called Notice Board, and what we've done is we've married many of these things that we spoke about into this particular platform. And this is a platform that's available on the mobile. It's a platform that's available on the desktop. But you can see over here, maybe it's too small, but there's something called as LSN Insta. So this is like our local Instagram, right? And this is what are used by the delivery boys. And you will be amazed the amount of content that gets generated over here. People say, hey, look, I'm out, I'm doing this, we've gone through this particular training, our branch has got trained. They'll take a picture and they'll put it up. Everybody else says, mujhe bhi is training jana hai, right? This creates that bit of excitement among all of them. There is, if we have any kind of, we say there's a morning huddle, that's a very important part of e-commerce, last mile logistics. We had to popularize this. We said, look, we tried. We always said, you should do a huddle. Yes, it's like, teachers telling you should study, but, we don't really take that in that same way as saying, there's a peer, there's another branch that has has done a huddle and has sent a picture saying, look, we are so cool, we've done a training, we've done a huddle. So those are ways in which we've kind of used, we've created a local Instagram that creates a lot of peer pressure and peer learning environment. That's one example that I want to show you. And you also can see, like if you once this guy puts up a picture, you can see how many people have read it, how many people have liked it. Same like what you find in an Instagram. This is one of the, and you have different channels. Like it's almost similar to a WhatsApp group, right? That you have, that you can actually see, okay. So we have a WhatsApp group for saying, okay, this is for the Northeast partners, this is for the West Bengal partners, this is for the Odisha partners, etc. It can also be used for us to communicate standard operating processes, right? This is standard operating procedure saying, okay, look, we want, what should happen, what should you do if this scenario happens? Now, your conventional way of training would have been, and processes keep changing so fast in our setup that what we've seen is if you have to then, the way you would, and you have only a limited team that has to communicate with hundreds and thousands of people, for you to do it in a technology-less way, I think is almost impossible to conceive, right? Because what will you do? You'll send an email to everybody, but what's the point of that? Nobody's going to read that anyway, right? Nobody is ready for reading email, and least of all, read it and understand what it means. And even more remote is for you to even understand and get some statistics on, I've sent this mail to 1,000 frontline people, 50% have not even opened it. Of the 50% who opened it, I don't know what they did with it, right? Or for me to understand whether they got what this thing meant. But we have things, for example, when we send out, we know that, okay, this guy, this is the number of people, this specifically, who of them have read it, who of them have consumed it. We also have some quizzes to say, okay, look, this is how you can do it. So there's a quiz that we have 1,000 members, and we know statistics of saying this many of them have actually have taken a quiz, right? And this many, and you can go as specific to say that Mr. Ramesh, who's working in Guwahati, has not taken the quiz, right? And therefore, you will give him a reminder that next time if you don't do it, then it's a mandatory thing if it's a compliance related thing. And the third time, what you can do is, look, I will not let you operate from your mobile for doing any of our company operations till you actually pass this quiz, right? or there are other cases where there have been some customer complaints that have come for a particular delivery boy saying he was rude to me, right? And there's a complaint, and complaints are treated very, very seriously. So what we do is we lock that guy's mobile for him to operate our application, and say this will only get unlocked when you actually do a small course on etiquette towards customers, right? And he has to say, then at least he's sensitized and he says, okay, I've done this, and then that thing gets opened up, right? So these are all very powerful ways of controlling and informing, sensitizing, and having some kind of a feedback loop by which you can actually control them and say, look, here is how you need to work. So I'll just pause here, but I hope this gives you some idea of what is, and I don't think it's new or revolutionary, but it's just that we found it the only way for us to work in a new age manner and deal with the problems that are very unique to the logistics setup, which is blue collar workforce, very different pattern of consuming content, very distributed operations, very high scale, things that keep changing on a regular basis, and very limited controls of what is happening in different places. So these are ways in which we've actually, smart hacks that we've developed for doing it. I hope more people do it, because I just don't see how we could have done it if we had not resolved, if we had not tried out these things. So pause here. Thank you so much for listening so attentively.
Raghu, I must compliment you and really thank you for that excellent presentation. Let me just compare our time with your time. That's generally we keep saying that. And I think I must give you full credit. I think we will all agree that logistics with such young leaders is in very safe hands. When we were there, it was L&D was the last on priority. If there was a budget crunch, L&D was the first thing to be kind of thrown out of the window. It was the HR's domain and HR's fiefdom, that whole thing. But now you hear young leaders driving training, operations driving training, and obviously that's how such startups are able to scale up so fast, empowering youth on the field. So I think full credit to you. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. May I now invite Mr. Julian. In our interaction with Mr. Julian always has the last word, and most often the last laugh also. So I'll again give Julian sir the privilege.
Thank you very much. I'm not quite sure what to make of the observation about me having the last laugh, but anyway, let's see. Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry that you still have to listen to me before you can all go home, so I'll make this brief and hopefully reasonably clear. I'm very grateful to this organisation for having allowed me to speak on this very important subject. What I'm going to try and do is talk briefly about some of the key issues in the logistics sector as I see them, not all of them, but certainly the major ones. Then run through one or two of the policy responses which I think need to be taken, which in turn give the context for the training that needs to be done here and frankly in lots of parts of the world in the logistics sector, and then one or two specific observations about some current subjects. Whatever else I say, I think one has to make sure that we hang on to one key point, and that is the importance of the logistics sector in this economy. I've had the privilege of living in and working in India on and off over the last 22 years, during which time there has been a sea change in the perception of the logistics industry. When I came here 22 years ago, most people, most policymakers couldn't even spell the word logistics. Now they certainly do, which is a tremendous improvement, and there is much focus on it. Unfortunately, it's an industry which, at least in my opinion, in this country, is not performing at the level that it should do in terms of supporting the wider aims of the economy. And clearly, therefore, in the context of this discussion and training, there is a very substantial task to be addressed. I think the key issues that the industry faces are probably numbering about 6 or 7. Firstly, whatever else we say, the industry remains relatively expensive. There's clearly been a lot of progress in the last few years, but the fact that logistics costs still comprise roughly 15% of India's GDP is a major issue. It puts us at a huge competitive disadvantage compared to other countries doing similar things with their economies. Now, we can all have a great argument about whether it's 14% or 16% or what. The point is the differential between that cost sector in this country and elsewhere is very substantial. As I said, we're making headway, but is it fast enough? The same observation, I think, can be made about ease of doing business. You've all seen the improvement in this index, and there's no doubt it is getting better. But in the logistics sector, we've still got ways to go, particularly in cross-border trading. We've managed to make the sector far too complicated, which in turn has resulted in the involvement of far too many intermediaries between the ultimate service provider on the one hand and the cargo owner on the other. And that means additional complexity and additional cost. The industry fails to be, and the regulatory environment fails to be as transparent as it should be. Importers and exporters endlessly find that they are unclear about what service levels they can reasonably expect and for what price. There are many, many hidden costs arising through delays, through damage, through lack of clarity of information. And we still have a situation where, whilst the physical infrastructure is developing, thanks to many of the initiatives that the government is undertaking, the regulatory environment around that is much less good. Now, as always, it's a patchy situation. There are some areas where there's great clarity, but other areas where there is less clarity and much less consistency. It therefore seems to me that the sort of key policy responses to all of this are about 4 or 5. Firstly, we have to work together to digitize the way in which we communicate information. It's, to me, absolutely fundamental that we simplify what we're trying to do, that we digitize it, mechanize it, in other words, so that people can see very clearly what's going on, and that, as I said, we simplify it all. That in turn means the systems platforms to underpin all that have to be developed very quickly. We need to see much greater regulatory focus in policy development, which means more contribution from industry about what needs to be taking place. We need to talk about end-to-end movement of cargo. Now, I know that's a bit of a buzzword. It's the sort of thing that people trot off at conferences like this, for example. We've really got to make that happen. Cargo is not delivered until it gets to the final user. Getting it to the port or the airport or the warehouse is only half of the job. We've got to develop a perception that the through movement is what's important, and people have to understand that. It therefore follows that logistics has to be seen as a fundamental plank in government economic policy. We've made great strides in the time that I've been here, certainly in the last few years, thanks to a very forward-thinking approach by many of the ministries involved, but we've still got a long way to go. So what does that mean in terms of the training context? Now, some of these points have already been made in the last in the last hour or so, but I'm not ashamed at all of repeating them, because I think they're very worthwhile. Firstly, we do have to recognize that this industry is changing very quickly. Whilst there is no question that one needs still a lot of people to carry things about, drive forklifts, drive trucks and all the rest of it, we have to recognize the importance of what is rather loosely called the e-commerce element. Far too much training still focuses on the physical side rather than the softer side, which in turn means that the old way of training people in classrooms has a relevance to some extent, but is less important than it used to be. If people have got a smartphone, they can be trained almost anywhere. The second point I'd make, and it's almost at the other end of the scale of all this, is that I don't think that there is by far enough leadership in the logistics industry. I'm talking about leadership as distinct from management. We're a very disorganized, diffuse industry. We need to see the development of real leaders in this industry, and I think this is an area where training institutes and others need to think about how they're going to rise to that challenge. If you're looking at that percentage of this country's GDP as being represented by logistics costs, sorry, okay, then we need leadership. It's a collective issue. There is a tendency for industry to say, oh, it's government, or it's the training institutes. It isn't. This is something that between all of us, we have to deal with. The Logistics Skills Council, I think, has made a good start. It's evident from what Captain Ramanujam has already talked about that there is industry-government cooperation, but we've got a lot further to go, and we need to find the right vehicle to do that. I also think that in terms of developing training, one's got to find a more efficient way of seeing government and the private sector cooperating, which may include incentivization of training for companies and institutions by government and other organizations. We've got to be better at communicating about training too. There's a heck of a lot of work being done by the LSC and other institutions, but I don't think much or that many people in the logistics industry really understand it all and understand what the role is that they should play. We need to work on that one. We've got a lot of work to do in terms of quality. The organization that I work for employs roughly 3,500 Indian seafarers, which is a substantial chunk of the market. We would like to do more, but finding the right people with the right base qualifications, particularly cadets, is hard work. There are lots of people out there with bits of paper which say they've done it or done the academic side of the training, but when you really look at what they've done, it isn't all that good. So we've got to find a way, I keep saying we, that is industry, government, training institutes, of raising the standard of people coming out of these training institutes. I know I've worked with Indian seafarers. I'm not a seafarer myself, but I've seen some of the quality that we get, and it's very good. We need more of that. The point's already been made time and again, but we're still ignoring 50% of the potential workforce. The number of women in the shipping logistics industry, particularly in the north of India, I think is pitiful. It's shameful. We need to do a heck of a lot better. That's a subject we could spend the rest of the day talking about, but if there's any one message that I think we've got to get our heads around, it's that one. And lastly, in terms of the things that training has to do, we have to find a way to project this industry as being more professional. There are professional institutes for lawyers, for doctors, for surveyors, for engineers, you name it. In the logistics industry, There are institutes like the CILT and others around the world, but frankly they don't trip off the tongue in the way that other professional institutes' names and initials do. We've got to think about that and what it really means in terms of attracting people from the industry and getting the industry's voice heard. So that's what a few observations about training. Captain Ramanujam asked me to make a few observations about one or two specific points, and then I'll shut up, because everybody, I'm sure, is by now looking at their watches and thinking of going home and things. Firstly, waterways. Everybody knows the story. We've got hundreds, if not thousands, of miles of navigable waterways, or potentially navigable waterways in this country, but they're not used. The percentage of this country's freight task that moves by either coastal or riverine transport is tiny compared to Europe or China or North America, to name but three. And it's not just because there are physical issues, of course there are, and we can go on and on about that and say it's all very difficult. One of the issues is that there simply aren't the people who understand the technical issues that are involved in moving cargo on rivers. We need to focus on that, and I think the Logistics Skills Council has got a big job to do there. Which takes me on to the second point, and that is this word multimodal. A lot of people talk about this as some sort of panacea. It's not really. All it means is that you move cargo from A to Z via a number of different modes, whether it's ship or airplane or car or cart or yak or whatever, and you cover it, the movement, with one document. I think that the task of training in this area is to demystify what it is that we're doing. It's not complicated. We've made it complicated, A, because in this country, unfortunately, the regulatory environment is overcomplicated, and frankly, a lot of people make money out of it being complicated. It doesn't need to be. We need to simplify things and get them down to the basics. And I think the LSC and other training institutes could usefully do that. Last but not least, Captain asked me to talk about the LSC and also what the CILT here and in places like the UK can do. I think the answer is the point that I've already touched on, and that is to make this industry much more professional than it is. There are lots of really good people. There are lots of people working really hard. There are lots of people, above all, thinking hard about this industry. But we've got to come across to other stakeholders as a professional bunch of people doing a really professional job. And that requires a bit of thought about how we're going to do it. Once that ball starts to roll, then a lot of the issues that we've been talking about will, I believe, start to resolve themselves because people will be paying attention. Not easy, I know, and it's very easy to stand here and make a laundry list of the things we've got to do. Much more difficult, I know, to actually do it. But I take great comfort from the fact that as I stand here after having lived in South Asia for on and off 22 years and look back at the progress that has been made here, it's substantial and it's very positive. This is a country full of innovative, assiduous, inventive people, and I have no doubt whatsoever that whether it's in running airlines or running roads or whatever it is, that those attributes will deal with this very challenging agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that's what I meant by the last laugh. So much of encouragement, so much of positivity. I think that's a lovely note to end this talk on. And thank you very much, sir. I think we got time for 2 questions. Please, sir.
This question is for all the panelists. I am representing Samartham, a society for disables. In the logistics section, you talked about women working and all. And also, Mr. Raghuram also told the front-end people, they are the more people working in the logistics section. And the question is to Mr. Ramanujam specifically, as per the skill training, we are doing skill training since 1997. And if you talk about the data, 2.68 crores of Indian populations are disabled, who are particularly having a capability of doing the work. What all different skills sets or QPs you have planned for the people in this section? Because to give a testimony, we are a skill trainers. Like if you have heard of blind cricket team of India, that's ours. We are promoting that. We are giving the skills. So it's a question to, as a policy maker and a, what all things you are including in these policies for the disabled?
A good question. You would be aware that there is a sector skill council called People with Disabilities, Sector Skill Council, which specifically works on this. Now, in how we do this is, we as a, when I say from the sector, we project the demand. For example, I have projected the demand for 20 for Amazon in Delhi. It's an actual case. Now, PWD Sector Skill Council says, and I say for what job role? They say, for example, it may be for labeling. You know, depending on the disability, a certain job can be performed. For example, if it is a labeling, people who are lesser able with the legs or something can easily do this kind of a job, right? So, based on the disability, then they say, okay, they nominate the people. Invariably, the same problem is there, which is for the normal thing. In this sector, I think one of the things which Dr. Ahirwar, I just wanted to mention also was, in this logistics sector, the nature of the place of work is in miles away from the place of residence. This is a fundamental problem. So, invariably you find that there is a total mismatch between supply where it is available and the demand. Supply is available on the eastern India, demand is in the western India. Similar is the case. Now people find that moving out of their local place, coming to an Amazon warehouse and working there, issues of transportation, pickup, drop, these are all inhibiting kind of factors, which is also for any other normal guy. I mean, that's what is the thing. But this, with multinationals, I mean, let me be frank, with multinational companies coming in, there is a much more of a inclusiveness that is coming in, which is a welcome thing. We still need to do a lot of work. But yes, it's opening up. We are trying to do something, but we haven't really achieved much, frankly. Would you like to add anything?
I really appreciate the concern. I mean, being pragmatic, the logistics sector is already a kind of a disadvantage to many of the even able individuals. So, to that extent, maybe looking at the social cause, I mean, for the persons with limited abilities, I mean, wherever in the logistics sector this can be applied, it's fine. But there can be a greater selection and exploring more possibilities in other sectors as well, because it is a need of employment, not as such employment in the logistics sector per se. So yes, as Mr. Ramanujam has already addressed that, tried to address that issue, in the logistics sector, some of the areas have been identified and where these special skills or especially trained individuals can be deployed. But yes, there's the larger issue that I also pointed out in my presentation, that with a greater mechanization, there's a new set of skills which are being required in the market, and despite being kind of a skilled society to start with, wherein the skills are inherent in our social system, despite this despite being the highly skilled society, we are having the skill shortage just because the context has changed, and almost completely. So in this chain context, we need to have different set of skills which the institutions like CILT, or maybe LSC, and of course the government institutions, they need to identify the changes and the quantum of changes which have taken place, and accordingly reorient our training process and the skill development process. Thank you.
Mr. Ahirwar, since the logistics infrastructure status has been recorded, and to further classify and define the different parameters, it will really be relevant for you to be requesting Ministry of Skill Development, who regulate the designations and nomenclatures, say in compliance with the international nomenclatures, to the Ministry of Skill Development. And they have a Apprentices Act which classifies the industries broadly in 46 categories. So 47th could be added for logistics infrastructure status.
We'll surely like to do. In fact, the Ministry of Skill Development, you must be having a direct interface with them as well, but we will surely like to advocate your case and put it with them for whatever necessary modifications or amendments are required in the law, the rules, or even the new policy initiative. We can definitely try to catalyze that process.
So may I just add, you got a point. See, the under the NCVT, courier and logistics was one kind of a clubbed thing. That is how it was kind of classified, courier and logistics. Now, in fact, just as recently as last month, we've had a meeting chaired by the Secretary Skills. Now that has all been kind of done away with. Now there's a proper kind of a classification now done for all the 12 subsectors. And each of them has been, I think, if that is the kind of question what you wanted, that under the Apprenticeship Act also, when we are going to do the training, the kind of what will be the common cost norms for the training, etc., will also be varying depending on the kind of job role. So all that has been done.
Nothing has been notified.
You're right about the notification. It should be coming out in time. The minutes of the meeting has happened. The minutes have been issued. Now it will be notified.
You cannot operate the optional training scheme without these categories being notified.
So that has been notified. So this 25 trades that has been, which I told you, optional trades, has been notified in the www.apprenticeship.gov.in. And for this, the curriculum has been made, and the CEO of the Logistics Skill Council has been nominated as the Joint Apprenticeship Advisor, which is a landmark decision, milestone kind of an event, and wherein the government has kind of given away its powers to the private sector to start doing the training. And incidentally, I have myself signed 250 contracts, and 250 candidates are undergoing training and are finished the basic training period and are being apprenticed.
No more questions. I hope we don't have.
So many vegetable vendors are there. 50% vegetables are there. Why not do the training program of vegetable vendor? Government have a 50% subsidy on the vegetable vendor. The Ministry of Food Processing.
Good point, sir. We have already done that also. In fact, if Mr. Anand Swarup had been there, he would have clearly come out with that this thing. Incidentally, we have taken this project in Madhya Pradesh. Pomegranates between 350 to 400 grams go for the export. Lesser is for the domestic use. Now, when it comes out of the farm, the sorting happens manually, and then after that goes in cardboard crates. So there are, as was brought out in the morning, packaging. There's a lot of wastage which is used, plus a lot of multiple handlings which happens. Another case, apples from Kullu to Delhi, the box with all those cardboard thing, supposed to take 20 kgs, the farmer loads it with 23 kgs, the apple gets kind of crushed. So for all this, we have given a solution. As I speak, the trial is going on, and hopefully by the end of this month, there will be a case study by which the green smart supply chain will be done, by which it will also create entrepreneurs in logistics, where these kind of reusable containers can be given to an entrepreneur who will use this for the supply chain. So that it has been done.
Thank you, speakers, for the very informative session. Now, may I please request Captain T.S. I'm so sorry, sir. Ramanujam, to hand over the token of appreciation to all our speakers.
May I, sir, present this to you as well? Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, two things that I'd like to mention. Thank you very much for your patience today. You've been a great audience, and we have managed to conclude the program with a 10-minute overrun, despite the fact that I did not allow you to go out for tea. But tea is now served, so please have tea at this point of time. I'd like to thank the speakers again. I'd like to thank, in fact, all the speakers since the morning for their diligence and their dedication to this program. And of course, I'd like to see you here again tomorrow morning at 9:30. We want to start sharp at 9:30, and we want to be able to conclude the program on time. Thank you.